to finish our, we're not going to finish. We're going to get deeper into this book. Deeper into the late night, deeper into Journeys Out of the Body. Again, no AI, no fake stuff, no AI voices, just real reading and conversation. Again, this book changed my life, and apparently it's changed quite a few people's lives. I've been reading the comments, and some people had the same experience that I had with this book a long time ago. So that's why we're reading it. This book pretty much started this broadcast for me, and it's kind of like a full circle thing. So anyways, long story short, appreciate you coming out if you're out here live or if you're listening after the broadcast. We like to read these books and then have discussions about them, and this one is a crazy one. It gets deeper and deeper, and the last time that we read about Locale 1. Locale 1, basically, he went into a brief introduction, because it was just an introduction, but it was a brief introduction into what he calls Locale 1, which is pretty much this area when we get out of body. So in the next chapter, called Infinity and Eternity, he's going to get into Locale 2. What's up, Dan? What's up, Grant? Cosmic Samurai. I'm trying to keep things on it's like the more I try to keep the show on a regular schedule, the crazier my personal life gets. I've had to be in and out of stuff here, but I apologize for the inconvenience if you're trying to find a regular time to come listen. All right, so let's get into it, because I don't know how long we got with this thing. So, Chapter 5, Infinity and Eternity. The best introduction to Locale 2 is to suggest a room with a sign over the door saying, "Please check all physical concepts here." If getting accustomed to the idea of a second body was an uneasy experience, well, Locale 2 may be hard to take. It is certain to produce emotional effects as it steps solidly upon what we have accepted as reality. Furthermore, many of our religion, doctrines, and the interpretations thereof become open to suggestion and question. It is enough to say that only a small part of the visits into Locale 2 via the second body has provided evidential data, for these visits do not easily lend themselves to proof. Therefore, much of the Locale 2 material is cautious extrapolation. However, several hundred experiments in this particular area have provided definite consistencies. If A plus B equals C 63 times, there is a high order of probability that A plus B will equal C the 64th time. That's a long way of saying, like if something keeps happening, it's bound to happen again, I guess. Postulate. Locale 2 is a non-material environment with laws of motion and matter only remotely related to the physical world. It is an immensely... It is an immensity whose bounds are unknown to this experimenter and has depth and dimension incomprehensible to the finite, conscious mind. In this vastness lies all of the aspects we attribute to heaven and hell, which are but part of Locale 2. So he's saying, and I think William Buhlman says kind of the same thing. I just don't know I don't think William Buhlman calls it Locale 2. But he's saying that even people's ideas or concepts of heaven and hell consist in this conscious area, or their experiences with it. It is inhabited, if that is the word, by entities with various degrees of intelligence with whom communication is possible. As noted in the percentile analysis in a later chapter, the fundamentals are altered in Locale 2. Time, by the standards of the physical world, is non-existent. There is a sequence of events, a past and a future, but no cyclical separation. Both continue to exist at the same time with the now. Measurements from microseconds to millennia are useless. Other measurements may represent these factors in abstract calculation, but this is uncertain. Laws of conservation of energy, force field theories, wave mechanics, gravity, matter structure, all remain to be proved by those more versed in such fields. Superseding all appears to be one prime law. Locale 2 is a state of being where that which we label thought is the wellspring of existence. It is the vital creative force that produces energy, assembles matter into form, and provides channels of perception and communication. I suspect that the very self or soul in locale 2 is no more than an organized vortex or warp in this fundamental. As you think, so you are. So this is a place of thought. It gets crazy, I guess, or thought is the wellspring of everything that exists in locale 2, is what he's saying. All right, so in this environment, no mechanical supplements are found. No cars, boats, airplanes, or rockets are needed for transportation. You think movement, and it is fact. No telephones, radio, television, other communication aids have value. Communication is instantaneous. No farms, gardens, cattle ranches, processing plants, or retail outlets are in evidence. In all experimental visits, no food, energy needs were indicated. How energy is replaced, if it is truly spent, is not known. Mere thought is the force that supplies any need or desire, and what you think is the matrix of your action, situation, and position in the greater reality. This is essentially the message that, hold on a second. This is essentially the message that religion and philosophy have been attempting to convey thoughts or throughout the ages, although perhaps less bluntly and often distorted. A facet learned in this medium of thought explains much. It is like attracts like. We've heard that before, right? Like attracts like. I didn't realize there was such a rule that acted so specifically. It had been, to me, nothing more or less than an abstraction. Project this outward and you begin to appreciate the infinite variations found in locale 2. Your destination seems to be grounded completely within the framework of your innermost constant motivations, emotions, and desires. You may not consciously want to go there, but you have no choice. Your supermind, or soul, is stronger and usually makes the decision for you. Like attracts like. So I remember this saying too that I don't know if it was Frater Xavier or Liam Thomas Christopher. I forget who said it, but one of the things that he said, it was Frater Xavier now that I'm thinking about it. He said that if you're not getting out of body or astral traveling or at the very least lucid dreaming, then you're not really in touch with your unconscious. So from what I'm gathering so far, and we're just now getting into this locale 2, is that locale 2 is kind of that place where all of thought matter exists. You know, that idea of the collective unconscious that Jung talks about. Well, this is an actual place in the astral realm where you can go to, and your thoughts pretty much take you everywhere, and your unconscious or subconscious, however you want to say it, is kind of leading the show the whole time. So the interesting aspect of this thought world, or worlds of locale 2, is that one does perceive what seems to be solid matter as well as artifacts common to the physical world. These are brought into existence, evidently, by three sources. First, they are the product of those, or thought of those who once lived in the physical world, the patterns which still remain. So the people that have lived before us and all of their collective thoughts and all their thoughts, all these things that they left in that thought memory are still in this place, right? This is accomplished quite automatically without deliberate intent. The second source is those who like certain material things in the physical world, which they have recreated apparently to enhance their surroundings in locale 2. So it's like Roblox, I guess. People are building worlds in this place. I don't know. The third source I assume to be a higher order of intelligent beings more aware of the locale 2 environment than most inhabitants. Their purpose seems to be that of simulation of the physical environment, temporarily at least, for the benefits of those just emerging from the physical world after death. This is done to reduce trauma and shock for the newcomers by introducing familiar shapes and settings in the early conversion stages. Thank God for that, right? Like if we pass away and then we go into locale 2, at least something looks familiar. By this time, one can begin to understand the relationship of the second body to locale 2. Locale 2 is the natural environment of the second body. The principles involved in its action, composition, perception, and control all correspond to those in locale 2. This then is why the majority of the experimental travel attempts took me involuntarily somewhere into locale 2. The second body is basically not of this physical world, and to apply it to its to visits to George's house or other physical destinations is like asking a diver to swim down to the ocean bed without scuba gear or a pressure suit. He can do it, but not for long and not too many times. On the other hand, he can walk a mile to the store daily without ill effects. Thus, travel to points in the physical world is a forced process in the second body state. So I guess, so from my interpretation of what he's saying here is, so when he first started getting out of body, he was in locale 1, right? He could move to the neighbor's house, go see his friends, stuff like this. But after a while, you start to get into this place called locale 2. And if you want to go visit your buddies in the physical world or whatever, and you're in this locale 2 state, it's hard. It takes effort to do so because I guess it's just like a crazier place. So, given the opportunity of the slightest mental relaxation, the supermind will guide you in your second body into locale 2. It is the natural thing to do. Our traditional concept of place suffers badly when applied to locale 2. It seems to interpret our physical world, yet spans limitless reaches beyond comprehension. Many theories have been offered in literature throughout the ages as to where of it, but few appeal to the modern scientific mind. All of the experimental visits to this area have helped little to formulate a more acceptable theory. The most acceptable is the wave vibration concept, which presumes the existence of an infinity of worlds, all operating at different frequencies, one of which is this physical world. And just as various wave frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum can simultaneously occupy space with a minimum of interaction, so might the worlds of locale 2 be interspersed in our physical matter world. Except for rare or unusual conditions, our natural, quote, natural senses and our instruments, which are extensions thereof, are completely unable to perceive and report this potential. If we consider this premise, the where, and in quotations, the where is answered neatly. Where is here? The history of man's science supports this premise. We had no idea that sounds existed beyond the range of human hearing until we developed instruments to detect them, measure, and create them. Until comparatively recently, those who claimed they could hear what others could not were considered insane or persecuted as witches and sorcerers. We were able to perceive the electromagnetic spectrum only in terms of heat and light until the last century. We are still unaware of the capacity of the human brain, an electrochemical organism in terms of transmission and reception of electromagnetic radiation. With this gap unbridged, it's easy to understand why modern science has not begun to consider the ability of the human mind to penetrate an area where no serious theory has been promulgated. There is so much to report on locale 2 that it would be impractical to quote directly from the hundreds of referential pages of notes. Visits near and far in locale 2 comprise most of the reporting throughout succeeding chapters. It is the summation of consistent experiences that may bring the pattern into focus and pose questions that plead for answers. For every known, there may be 1 million unknowns, but at least here is a starting point. The one thing I don't understand is, why is he calling locale 2 a starting point, right? Like, to me, locale 1 is a starting point because it's closer to the physical world. If this place is just as, I don't think I've had too many visits in locale 2 at all, personally, but if this place is just as crazy as he says it is, it wouldn't really, I don't know why he would call it a starting point, but I guess maybe he means a starting point in conscious exploration or maybe even science in that field. In locale 2, reality is composed of the deepest desires and most frantic fears. Thought is action, and no hiding layers of conditioning or inhibition shield the inner you from others, where honesty is the best policy because there can be nothing less. You can't hide in that place. You better be honest, huh? Under the basic standards described above, existence is indeed different. It is this difference that creates the great problems of adjustment even when attempting to visit there while in the second body. The raw emotion so carefully repressed in our physical civilization is unleashed in full force. To say that it is overwhelming at first is a massive understatement in conscious physical life. This condition would be considered psychotic. If we lived in a world where everyone's emotions were like visible, it probably would seem, if it was just all out, right? Probably would seem a bit psychotic. My first visits to Locale 2 brought out all the repressed emotional patterns I even remotely considered I had, plus many I didn't know existed. They so dominated my actions that I returned completely abashed and embarrassed at their enormity and my ability to control them. Fear. Fear was the dominant theme. Fear of the unknown, of strange beings, non-physical, of death, of God, of rule breaking, of discovery, and of pain, to name only a few. Such fears were stronger than the sexual drive for union, which, as rioted elsewhere, was in itself a tremendous obstacle. So remember, so that doesn't confuse you, when he's getting out of body, he keeps running into this certain frequency where there's a rise in like sexual drive. But he's saying that the emotions in this place are even stronger than that. One by one, painfully and laboriously, the exploding, uncontrollable emotional patterns had to be harnessed. Until this was accomplished, no rational thought was possible. Without rigorous consistency, they begin to return. It is much like a slow learning from uninsanity to calm, objective reasoning. An infant learns to be civilized in its growth through childhood to adult status. I suspect the same thing occurs all over again in the adaptation to Locale 2. If it doesn't happen during physical life, it becomes the first order of business upon death. This implies that the areas of Locale 2 nearest the physical world, in vibratory frequency maybe, are peopled for the most part with insane or near insane emotionally driven beings, which makes it a crazy place to visit, right? For the most part, this seems to be true. They include those alive, but asleep or drugged and out in their second bodies, and quite probably those who are dead, but still emotionally driven. There is evidence to support the former, and the latter seems probable. That's a crazy place to be. Can you imagine that? You're in this area where people that are asleep, they're just flying around unknown, emotionally driven, when they're not aware, and they're in their sleep state, they're just emotionally driven all around in this place. And you got people that have just died here as well, emotionally driven, probably distraught, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. What a chaotic place that would be. This near area, quite understandably, is not a pleasant place to be. It is a level or plane where you belong until you learn better. I don't know what happens to those who don't learn. Perhaps they stay there forever. The moment you disassociate from the physical via the second body, you're on the fringes of this close-by section of Locale 2. It is here that one meets all sorts of disjointed personalities and animate beings. If there is some protective mechanism for the neophyte, it was not apparent to me. Only by cautious and sometimes terrifying experimentation was I able to learn that the art or trick of passing through the area. I still am not precisely sure of all the items in this learning process, and so have presented only the obvious. Whatever the process, I happily have not encountered trouble in these passages for several years. Aside from the tormentors and several outright conflicts noted in the following reports, the principal motivation of these near inhabitants is sexual release in all forms. Remember, he's saying sexual release in all forms is the principal motivation for all these inhabitants. Now that sounds crazy. Why would that be why would that be the one thing that needs to happen more than anything? Well, if you consider how we are as energetic beings in the physical world, and if you keep asking about our why motivations to the deep enough power, you'll see that also rules our existence here as well. If considered as the product of recent civilizations, including those both alive but sleeping and, quote, dead, it is quite simple to understand the need for release from repression of this basic need. The key is that all those in this near section attempt sexuality in terms of the physical body. But there is no recognition or knowledge of sex drive as it is manifested in more distant parts of locale 2. With the lingering conditions of our own society, it was difficult to avoid participation at times, and as response was automatic, hopefully one learns to control this factor. Like attracts like. To date, I have not observed the death process in any experiments. However, the conclusion that some form of existence in locale 2 follows life activity in the known physical world goes beyond conjecture. Experience is similar to the following, consistent in content over the past 12 years, may be explained by some other concept. At this time, nothing else fits quite so neatly. On one occasion, I had just left the physical when I felt an urgent need to go somewhere. And yielding to the insistence, I moved what seemed to be a short distance and stopped suddenly in a bedroom. A boy was lying in bed, alone. He seemed about 10 or 11 in age, and that now familiar inner identity perception was at work rather than just seeing. The boy was lonely and afraid and seemed ill. I stayed with him for some time, trying to comfort him, and finally left when he had calmed down, promising I would return. The trip back to the physical was uneventful, and I had no idea where I'd been. Several weeks later, I left the physical and was about to concentrate on a given destination when the same boy moved into view. He saw me and moved close to me. He was bewildered but not afraid. He looked up to me and asked, "Well, what do I do now?" I couldn't immediately think of how to reply, so I put my arm over his shoulder and gave him a comforting squeeze. I thought, who am I to instruct or give directions at what seemed a vital moment? The boy was reassured by my presence and relaxed. "Where do I go?" he asked, in a matter-of-factly. I said the only thing that seemed logical at the time. I told him to wait right where he was, that some friends of his would be along shortly, and they would take him where he was supposed to go. This seemed to satisfy him, and I kept my arm around him for a while, and then I became nervous with the signal from the physical body, and patted him on the shoulder and left. Returning to the physical, I found my neck stiffened from being in an awkward position, and after straightening out, I succeeded in going into the second body again to look for the boy. He was gone, or at least I couldn't find him. An interesting sidelight. The next day, the newspaper carried the story of the death of a 10-year-old boy after a lingering illness. He had died in the afternoon shortly before I had begun the experiment. I tried to think of some acceptable excuse to approach his parents and get more confirmation and perhaps relieve their grief, but could find none. Only when you have passed the, quote, raw emotion stage do you move into the innumerable various but evidently organized activity clusters of locale 2. So you're not even going to get past this barrier if you've got tons of emotional stuff going on. It is impossible to convey to another the reality of this non-physical eternity. As stated by many in centuries past, it must be experienced. Most importantly, in many of the places visited, the inhabitants are still, in quotations, human. Different in a changed environment, but still with human understandable attributes. On one visit, I ended up in a park-like surrounding with carefully tended flowers, trees, and grass, much like a large mall with paths crisscrossing the area. There were benches along the paths, and there were hundreds of men and women strolling by or sitting on the benches. Some were quite calm, others a little apprehensive, and many had a dazed or shocked look of disorientation. They appeared uncertain, unknowing of what to do or what was to take place next. And somehow I knew that this was a meeting place where newly arrived waited for friends or relatives from this place of meeting. These friends would take each other or each newcomer to the proper place where he or she, quote, belonged. I could not think of any reason to stay longer. There was no one nearby I recognized, so I returned to the physical without incident. Sounds to me like he thinks that this place is some kind of like waiting transition, like a waiting room or something, right? Another time I deliberately set out to explore in the hope of finding one answer to bring back. Upon disassociating into the second body, I started to move rapidly as I concentrated upon the thought I wished to go where there are higher intelligences. I kept concentrating as I sped swiftly through a void that seemed endless. Finally, I stopped. I was in a narrow valley which seemed normal in all respects. There were men and women in ankle-length robes, dark in color. And this time, I decided for some reason to take another tack. I approached several of the women and asked them if they knew who I was. All were quite polite and treated me with great respect, but gave negative answers. I turned away and asked the same question of a man in a monk's robe who seemed hauntingly familiar. "Yes, I know you," the man replied. There was a strong sense of understanding and friendship in his attitude. I asked him if I truly knew who I was myself. That's a damn good question to ask. I'd be asking the same thing. He looked at me as if he had met an old and dear friend who had amnesia. "You will," he smiled gently as he said it. I asked him if he knew who I had been last. I was trying to get him to say my name. You were last a monk in Coshocton, Pennsylvania." I started to get uneasy and apologetically left, returning to the physical. Where the hell is Coshocton, Pennsylvania? If I was him, I would have went, like, if some dude in the astral realm was like, "Oh, you were a monk in Coshocton, Pennsylvania," I would have been like, "Well, I'm going to go check this place out and see if it feels familiar." So he said, I started to get uneasy and apologetically left, returning to the physical. Recently, a Catholic priest friend took the trouble to investigate this possibility of past life monasticism. And to my surprise and his delight, there is an obscure monastery near Coshocton. He has offered to take me there for a visit, but time and maybe courage has not been available. Perhaps later. Oh man, Bob, you should have went up there and checked that out. I could report many more of these experiences without fully describing the scope and dimension of Locale 2. There have been visits to a group that appeared to be in uniform, which operated highly technical equipment and identified themselves as the target army. I don't remember reading this part. There have been visits to a group that appeared to be in uniform, which operated highly technical equipment. They identified themselves as the target army, the mind's interpretation of what was said. There were hundreds, each waiting for, quote, assignments, and their purpose was not disclosed. Another visit took me to a well-organized city where my presence was immediately construed as hostile. Only by taking evasive action, running, hiding, and finally lifting straight up was I able to avoid, quote, capture. I do not know what threat I implied to them. This place sounds crazy already, doesn't it? It gets crazier, too. In a more direct fashion, the appearance of very aggressive actions tended to confirm again that Locale 2 is not solely a place of serenity and non-conflict. On another trip, I was accosted by conventionally dressed man. Warily, I waited to see what he would do. "Do you know or remember Orocio Lafranco?" he asked the question bluntly. I replied that I did not, still cautious. "Well, I'm sure you will remember if you think back," the man said firmly. There was a subtle demanding in his attitude which made me uneasy. I replied that I was sure I didn't remember anyone by that name. "Do you know anyone at all down there?" he asked. I just said that I did not, when I suddenly went limp, and the man grabbed me. He took one of my arms, and I felt someone else take another, and they started to drag me in the direction of what seemed to be 3 bright spots of lights. I struggled and finally broke loose when I remembered to use the go-to physical signal. I moved away rapidly, and after a short time was back in the office into the physical. Evidently, hopefully, I had been mistaken for someone else. Still, another trip had human attributes, human in quotations. I had arrived at no particular place, just a grayness, and was trying to decide what to do when a woman approached me. "I am from the church, and I am here to help you," she said calmly. She came close, and I immediately sensed the female sexuality, but held back as I didn't think that the church intended this kind of help. I was wrong. After a bit, I thanked her and turned to see a man standing nearby watching. So this is the first time he's talking about where he had a sexual union of some kind in the astral realm, and some dude standing over there watched him. Or what do you call it? Melding, whatever people call it. He spoke in a strong voice, spoke in quotations, heavy with sarcasm. Well, now are you ready to learn the secrets of the universe? I masked my embarrassment by asking who he was. Albert Mather, he almost shouted it. I also got the impression that he was calling me by this name. I hope you're ready, he went on, his voice rising in anger, because nobody took the trouble to tell me when I was back there. I didn't hear the rest. It was as if a roar of static interfered. I moved away, not sure how his anger would vent itself, and returned to the physical uneventfully. In checking, I found no significant historical record of an Albert Mather, who seemed to have no relation to the minister Cotton Mather of the 18th century. I found no significant historical record of the guy. Okay, yeah, so he's checking to see. That makes sense, all right. Other experiences in Locale 2 were more friendly, as indicated elsewhere. And most, there is no discernible pattern as to what attracted me to some of these strange situations. Perhaps this will come eventually. 2 unusual reoccurring conditions must be added to the coverage of this area. A number of times the motion of travel, which is usually rapid and smooth, has been interrupted by what feels like a violent, hurricane-like gust in the spatiality throughout which one moves. It is as if you are being blown away by this uncontrolled force, tossed haphazardly around and end over end like a leaf in a gale. It is impossible to move against this torrent or do anything but let it carry you. Finally, you are tossed near the edge of the current, and you drop out unharmed. There is nothing to identify it, but it feels natural rather than artificially created. So there's some kind of crazy astral tornado in there that carries you around and drops you off. That's weird. The second condition is the sign in the sky. I observed this on 5 or 6 occasions when escorted by the, quote, helpers. It is an incredible series of crude symbols strung in an arc directly across one section of Locale 2. When moving through the area, everyone has to go around this barrier as it is solid, immovable, and immutable. A sign in the sky. See, it's hard to keep up with all this stuff, isn't it? Because it just seems so erratic or chaotic or nonsensical. The symbols, as best my seeing could determine, were crude, stick-like illustrations of a man, an older woman, a house, and what looked to be an algebraic equations. It was from one of the helpers that I learned the story of the sign. He told it with some humor, almost apologetically. It seems that an almost measureless time ago, a very wealthy, by what standard is not known, and powerful woman wanted to ensure that her son would get into heaven. A church offered to guarantee this to her, provided she paid the church a tremendous sum of money, which is pretty sick. But the woman paid the church, but her son did not get into heaven, and in anger and revenge she used her entire remaining wealth and power to have the sign put up in the skies of heaven, so that throughout all eternity all who saw it would know of the dishonesty and rascality of that particular church. It was a job well done, and the names of the woman, her son, and the church are lost in antiquity, but the sign remains, impervious to the efforts of scientists through the ages to bring it down or destroy it. The source of the apology and slight embarrassment is not the perfidy of some obscure sect, but the inability of anyone to take down the sign, and as a result, all studies of science in this part of Locale 2 must necessarily include it. It would be much the same as if someone artificially created an element between cobalt and copper. And if you studied chemistry by necessity, you would have to include this odd element. Or if a huge artificial moon were created and it was beyond our science to bring it down, students of astronomy would include it in their lessons as a common fact. And that's the story as it was told to me. That's just weird. It's so freaking weird. Some woman got mad because the church ripped her off, didn't get her son into heaven, and now there's this big astral sign in the astral realm that nobody can seem to move, take down, or do anything with. It's just weird. The greatest difficulty in the ability or inability of the conscious mind, trained and conditioned in a physical world, to accept the existence of the infinite locale too. Our young Western mental sciences tend to deny its existence. Our religions affirm it in a broad, distorted abstraction. Accepted science contradicts such a possibility and can find no supporting evidence through their instruments of research and measurement. Most of all, there is a barrier. Why it exists is not truly known by anyone, at least in the Western world. This is the same screen that lowers when you awaken from sleep, blotted out your last dream, or the memory of your last visit to Locale 2. This is not to imply that every dream is the product of a Locale 2 visit, but some of them may well be the translation of Locale 2 experiences. Translation: the symbolism or the symbolization of Locale 2 experience is not necessarily part of the barrier. Rather, it would seem to be the effort of the conscious to interpret superconscious, Locale 2 events which are beyond its ability to comprehend or picturalize. Observation via the second body in Locale 1 to here and now proved that most ordinary functions or actions were subject to misinterpretation, especially when observed out of context. Locale 2 is an environment totally unfamiliar to the conscious, and it offers that much greater margin for interpretive error. As can be inferred, I suspect that many, or most, or all human beings visit Locale 2 at some time during the sleep state. Why such visits are necessary, I don't know. Perhaps one day, some year, our life sciences will unravel this knowledge, and a new era will be born for mankind. With this will come an entire new science based upon Locale 2 data and our relationship to this wondrous world. Someday, if mankind can wait that long. Listen, that is crazy. So that's a lot in one chapter, is it not? If you think about it, that's a lot. So you have to get past what's crazy about this place is you have to get past all of your emotions. You have to center your emotions somehow. Not only that, get past this sexual barrier in the astral realm. So from what I gathered in this onion that Robert's experiencing is the physical Locale 1, some kind of sexual barrier that keeps coming in, and if we've studied the ancient mysteries and all their phallic symbols and the esoteric and all the stuff they were trying to teach us, these two alpha and omega, masculine and feminine energies pretty much run all of existence anyways, energetically. So there's that barrier, the emotional barrier. And then when he gets in here, it's full of people that have just passed away, people that are asleep, people that are, I guess, not asleep. There's a waiting room of some kind. I mean, I'm just recapping this chapter here. There's people's deep emotional stories, like this woman who lost her son or lost her money to the church that just pretty much robbed her, and somehow her son didn't get in heaven. So she was so powerful in the collective somehow that the sign that she put up in this place, nobody can move. Then there seems to be some kind of barrier. It's just a chaotic play. And then not to mention that I know I'm leaving some stuff out. The tornado that he said he was involved in, that he gets dropped off on. Now, we have to really think that maybe some of this is coming from Robert when he gets to Locale 2. But based on how he does things, like in how he experiments with things, I think that he's doing a good job trying to convey of whatever this place is energetically. All right, so chapter 6, reverse image. Let's see. All right. Paradoxically, the scientists today can conceive far more easily of the possibility of the area here labeled Locale 3 than that of Locale 2. So there's another area. Why? Because it fits his latest discoveries in physics, small bits of evidence he has uncovered in his experiments with matter, bombardment, accelerators, cyclotrons, etc. The best way to get acquainted with locale 3 is to take the significant experiments leading up to it directly from the notes. So we're just going to jump into his notes because he has no way of explaining it other than his notes. November the 5th, 1958, in the afternoon. The vibrations came quickly and easily and were not at all uncomfortable. When they were strong, I tried to lift out of the physical with no result. Whatever thought or combination I tried, I remained confined right there where I was. I then remembered the rotating trick, which operates just as if you are turning over in bed. I started to turn and recognized that my physical was not turning with me. I moved slowly, and after a moment I was face down, or in the direct opposition to the placement of my physical body. The moment I reached this 180-degree position, or out of phase, opposite polarity, ? There was a hole. That's the only way to describe it. To my senses, it seemed to be a hole in a wall which was about 2 feet thick and stretched endlessly in all directions, in the vertical plane. It's just crazy enough to me that you can rotate your body like right. I'm sure you know once you separate. I've never tried this, but to rotate directly opposite. The periphery of the hole was just precisely the shape of my physical body, and I touched the wall and it felt smooth and hard. The edges of the hole were relatively rough. All this touching done with the non-physical hands, by the way. Beyond, through the hole, was nothing but blackness. It was not the blackness of a dark room, but a feeling of infinite distance and space, as if I were looking through a window into distant space. I felt that if my vision were good enough, I could probably see nearby stars and planets. My impression, therefore, was a deep outer space beyond the solar system, far and an incredible distance. I moved cautiously through the hole, holding on to its sides, and poked my head through it carefully. This is fucking wild. Nothing but blackness. No people, nothing material. I ducked back in hurriedly because of the utter strangeness. I rotated back 180 degrees, felt myself merge with the physical body, and sat up. It was broad daylight, just as when I had left what seemed to a few minutes before lapse time, 1 hour and 5 minutes. So all I can imagine is like the hole in Looney Tunes, right? When he's talking about this, you know, the holes they used to. If you ever watch Looney Tunes, cartoons, they pop out a hole and go through it. That's all I can imagine. That's all I can imagine right now. And now he's even saying, you know, the first time I went through this hole, it just seemed like it was minutes, but when I woke up, it was 1 hour and 5 minutes. November 18th, 1958, nighttime. The vibrations came in strong, but nothing more. Again, I thought to try the rotation. When I did, it worked, and I rotated slowly into the 180-degree position. There was the wall, and the hole, and the blackness beyond. This time I was more cautious. Carefully, I reached a hand through and into the blackness. I was astounded when a hand took mine and shook it. It felt like a human hand, normally warm to the touch. And after the handshake, I withdrew my hand quickly. Slowly, I reached into the hole again. The hand shook mine again and placed a card in it. I withdrew my hand and looked at the card. It gave a specific address. I returned the card through the hole, shook hands again, withdrew my hand, rotated back to normal, merged with the physical body, and sat up. Most unusual. I will have to investigate this address on Broadway if it is in New York. Man, I don't even know what to say about that. I wouldn't go through that hole. And if someone shook my hand, that would probably freak me out. I'd probably jumped out of my skin. December the 5th, 1958, morning. I rotated again and again, found the hole. Still with a note of caution, I approached the hole, and this time reached through with both hands. Instantly, both were grasped by 2 other hands. Then, for the first time in all my experimentation, my name was called. A voice, feminine, soft, low-pitched, and urgent, just as if someone were trying to wake me up from sleep without startling too much. Called Bob. Bob. That's my soft, feminine voice, by the way, but I was startled at first and then recovered and asked, "What is your name?" Always looking for evidential material. When I said these words, there seemed to be and he has said in quotation marks. So I'm guessing he don't know if he telepathically said it or if it was vocal or he's not sure. So he said, when I said these words, there seemed to be intense motion or activity, as if my words had created the effect of dropping a stone into a still lake or pond, like rippling, scurrying, crackling, etc. The voice repeated my name, and I repeated my question, still with two hands holding mine. To be sure I was completely conscious that I was actually somehow saying the words correctly, I withdrew my hands, rotated in the 180 degree, blended with the physical body, sat up physically, and vocally spoke the question. Satisfied, I lay back, rotated, and called the question through the hole again. No answer. I kept trying until I began to feel the vibrations weakening and knew I couldn't hold the condition any longer. I then rotated back into the physical and normalcy. Doesn't that sound like something that's in a, not maybe a horror? It's either, I get two pictures with this hole, right? With someone grabbing two hands, right? It's either Looney Tunes or a horror film. It's one of the two in my mind for some reason. December 27th, 1958, nighttime. Upon setting up the vibrations, I again found the hole as expected. I gathered up courage and slowly poked my head through the hole. The moment I did, I heard a voice say in utter excitement and surprise, "Come here, quick, look." But I could see no one. This could be due to my closed eyes, conditioning in order to hold the vibration effect, maybe. Physical seeing distracts the condition. But there was still blackness, and the other party didn't seem to be coming, so the voice called again urgently and excitedly. But the vibrations seemed to be weakening, so I pulled back out of the hole and rotated back into the physical without incident. It's like Mel's hole, except in astral form. January 15th, 1959, in the afternoon. The vibrations came finally, and I rotated to examine the hole again. There it was, at 180 degrees. I was a little nervous when I reached through it with one hand. Then I mentally smiled and relaxed, saying to myself, well, be it hand, claw, or paw, I'm friendly. And with that, a hand took mine and squeezed it, and I returned the grasp. I definitely sensed a feeling of friendliness from the other side. I returned to the physical by rotation after a little difficulty, and in my excitement, I forgot both rotation and return to normal signal. I forgot both. I guess he just forgot or turned to the physical. Oh, with little difficulty. I guess he's saying here that he got excited and just forgot how to do it. January 21st, 1959, nighttime. As a preliminary, I tried the hole again. Rotation went smoothly after the vibration started, and then I reached one arm deep into the hole. When I reached in with the other arm, something sharp seemed to dig into my the palm of my hand like a hook, and dug in more deeply when I tried to withdraw it. Damn, that just made my hand hurt saying it. I felt a hook, like a fish hook, going through my hand. I finally did so, somewhat shaken. It felt as if the hook had gone right through my hand. It was not necessarily painful, but the effect was disturbing. I rotated to the physical and looked at my right hand, physically. There were no marks or feeling, although the sensation of penetration after effect was present. Man. January 25th, 1959. Another hole experiment with the same pattern of vibrations, and 180 degrees again, I carefully reached into the hole. A hand again took mine and held it firmly, but no hook. Then the hand passed mine over to a second hand, and I slowly released the second hand, and I felt upward. There was definitely an arm attached to the hand and a shoulder, so he's sliding his hand up their wrist and arm. Okay. So there was definitely an arm attached to the hand and a shoulder I was about to explore more, when the vibration seemed to soften, and I pulled my arm back and rotated to the physical. There was no indication of the need to return to the physical. No cramped arms or legs, no noises. Maybe it was probably a momentary sound that caused the return. I wonder if he notated every experiment. Like, these are a lot of his experiments with this whole thing, but I wonder if he notated, he probably had a whole bunch more experiences with this thing. February 5th, 1959, in the afternoon. Perhaps my concern with the hole is justified. I followed the same approach pattern, vibrations, and 180-degree rotation. Reached into the hole, and at first felt nothing. I reached deeper, and suddenly, it felt as if I had thrust my hand into electrically charged hot water. This was a really accurate description, he says. I withdrew it very quickly, rotated, and sat up physically. The physical hand felt numb and tingling. And from the position of my body, there was no evidence of poor circulation. The numbness and tingling slowly disappeared in about 20 minutes. That's pretty damn trippy. So imagine you get out of body. Just imagine this. You turn, you see the hole, you reach your hand through it, and then all of a sudden your hand feels like it's hot and electric. Then you wake up. You're not sleeping on your hand. There's no reason for it to feel that way. It's not in an awkward position, and yet when you wake up, it still feels the same way, and it's starting to fade. No evidence of poor circulation. The numbness and tingling slowly disappeared, and it took in about 20 minutes. February 15th, 1959, in the afternoon, I experimented with going in and out vertically, then rotated to the hole. Gathering courage, I pulled myself through in a sweeping rush, just as a swimmer might pull himself through a hole underwater. I felt the other side of the hole, and the wall was similar to my side. I tried to see, and he has that in quotations, but there was still nothing but deep blackness. I decided to settle the matter once and for all. I shoved away from the hole and performed the stretch out in a direction exactly on a line away from the hole. I started to move slowly and soon accelerated rapidly. I kept moving more rapidly, yet with only a slight sense of friction over my body. Moving at what seemed a very high speed, I went on, waiting and expecting to get somewhere. Get is in quotations. After what seemed a very long time, I began to be concerned. I still saw, and that's in quotations, nothing. I felt nothing. And finally I began to get nervous. Fears about becoming lost began to creep in. I slowly stopped, turned around, and stretched out back in the direction of the hole. It took just as long to get back as it did to go. I was quite worried when I finally saw the light through the hole up ahead. I dove for it, went through it, rotated, and sat up physically. Time away was 3 hours and 15 minutes. He's got that in exclamation points. Can you imagine doing that? Like in your astral body, you flip around, go through this black hole, and you just fly at a high rate of speed for that long and nothing. You're not. It's not getting you anywhere. Quotations getting. You're not going anywhere. Then you start worrying. Oh shit! Am I going to be able to make it back to my body? And then it takes him just as long to get back. That sounds terrifying, man. February 23rd, 1959, nighttime. The hole is populated. This evening at 7:30, I went through vibration and 180-degree rotation, and this time, without much hesitation, I pulled myself through and stood up. I immediately felt myself in the presence of someone standing there. I sensed his presence rather than saw him. I got an impression that it was a male. And for some unaccountable reason that I do not yet understand, even recollected now in tranquility, I dropped thankfully in front of him and sobbed. After a moment, I calmed down, carefully backed away, and went through the hole, rotated back into the physical, and sat up. Who was it, and why did I act so emotionally? Now that's weird. So he just had this feeling of a presence of a dude, and he couldn't help but drop to his knees and start crying inside this black hole. That's pretty weird. February 27th, 1959, nighttime. Determined to find some more or even one answers about the hole, I went through the vibration and 180-degree rotation pattern and deliberately went through. It was still black and dark, but not unpleasant. No hands, no presence. I could feel something solid under me. So I tried very hard to open my eyes and, quote, see. I did, and eventually everything came into view. I was standing near a building, or more like a barn than a house, on what was a wide meadow-like area. I thought I would try to soar up into the sky. Deep, clear blue, but no clouds. But I couldn't seem to get off the ground. Maybe I had weight here. So now, for the first time, he can't fly in the astral realm. He's not able to. There was what looked like a ladder, 100 feet or so away, and I went to it and realized it was a tower of some kind, about 10 feet tall. Like a bird needing takeoff room, I climbed the tower to the top, leaped away in takeoff, and fell promptly to the ground with a solid thud. I guess I was surprised as a bird with clipped wings must feel, or that's how it must feel. So I got to my feet and realized how foolishly I was acting. I was not following the proper procedure. Even here, they had to be followed. I held up my hands and arms in the stretch-out position and went up easily. I moved slower over the meadow, enjoying the view and exploration, when suddenly something flew past me. I turned just in time to see it heading for the wall and the hole. I was afraid for some reason that this was something that would go through and try to enter my body, so I wheeled in flight and dove for the hole. Too late. I'd realized that what I thought was the hole was a window in the side of the building, and then I was through the window and in the blackness. I felt around in the dark, and there was the outline of the hole. I went through, rotated, and sat up in the physical. Everything looked normal, and I was in the right place. The time passage was okay, so back I went. Vibrations were still strong, so I rotated 180 degrees, went through the hole, and out into the brightness. More observant this trip, I noticed two people, a man and a woman, sitting in chairs near outside of the building. I couldn't make contact with the man, but the woman, no physical identification other than this, seemed to know I was there. I asked her if she knew who I was, but I could get nothing other than a sense of awareness on her part. The vibration started to fade, so I backed away, dove into the hole, rotated, and sat up. Total time of the entire episode was 40 minutes. Weird experiments. That's more than Twilight Zone stuff there, man. What can be made of these experiments? Taken at face value, they add up and the least to an unusual hallucination. At most, the observations show a developmental pattern. First, there seems to be nothing in written history of such experiences as these to offer a comparison. These were not spontaneous incidents, but deliberately planned and systematically repeated. As such, they would appear to be unique. Second, the experiment was repeatable by formula. The setting up of the vibration condition, followed by 2, a 180-degree rotation, and 3, the appearance of the hole. The experiment was performed not once, but at least 11 times. The 180-degree rotation offers interesting speculation. The reference to out of phase in quotations and the apparent identical displacement in exact opposition deserves the attention of the physicist. Waveform studies of phase relationships applied in this case might provide a fruitful theory. The blackness of the hole was evidently a matter of my own limitation in seeing. Through the early experimentation, the restriction of vision was self-imposed, as I felt this was a requisite for maintaining the vibration condition. So for some reason, he didn't want to open his eyes so he could hold the vibratory state longer, or he didn't want to see. At least that's what he was telling himself. So the evidence seems to point in the success in seeing when I decided to or tried to see and did. It would have been interesting indeed if I had utilized my vision during the long exploratory, quote, flight. Much might have been learned. The experience of the hands defies explanation. There is no evidence to indicate that I was conditioned or suggested into the first discovery of the hand. Second and later such experiences, however, could have well been of this source. But this no way invalidates the first of these impressions. The card with the address might fall into the classification of past memories associated with the handshake of a first meeting. Unexplained still is the, quote, digging of the hook into my hand. The calling of one's name is not uncommon under other circumstances. There are numerous records of such sourceless voices both in the waking and sleep states. Various psychological theories have been formulated to explain this event with partial success. Most interesting is the report concerning the evident discovery by some other party of my penetration through the hole. In accord with published reports of other experimenters, penetration of the, quote, hole was visible to a person or intelligence at some location other than their immediate vicinity. If this followed the patterns of other such reports, the time element would be identical. There is no means to verify this one way or the other. My emotional reaction to the meeting with the, quote, someone had many of the aspects of a mystical experience. It is significant that I felt a sense of humble ecstasy which triggered an emotional release. So he's talking about the person that he knew was there, couldn't see them, but he knew was there, and he just kind of like hit his knees and started crying that time. That was the beginning. A series of experiments followed that were remarkable in their consistency of data and defied any historical explanation. The curious intellect cannot dismiss the collective experience as hallucination. Locale 3, in summary, proved to be a physical matter world almost identical to our own. The natural environment is the same. There are trees, houses, cities, people, artifacts, and all the appearances of a reasonably civilized society. There are homes, families, businesses, and people that work for a living. There are roads on which vehicles travel. There are railroads and trains. Now for the, quote, almost. At first, the thought was that Locale 3 was no more than some part of our world unknown to me and those others concerned. It had all the appearances of being so. However, more careful study showed that it can be neither the present nor the past of our physical matter world. The scientific development is inconsistent. There are no electrical devices whatsoever. Electricity, electromagnetics, and anything so related are non-existent. No electric lights, telephones, radios, television, or electrical power. He's talking as if this is some like parallel universe or something, isn't it? No internal combustion, gasoline, or oil were found as power sources. Yet mechanical power is used. Careful examination of one of the locomotives that pulled a string of old-fashioned looking passenger cars showed it to be driven by a steam engine. The cars appeared to be made of wood, the locomotive of metal, but of a different shape than our now obsolete types. The track gauge was much smaller than our standard track spacing, smaller than our narrow gauge mountain railways. I observed the servicing of one of the locomotives in detail. Neither wood nor coal was used as a thermal source to produce the steam. Instead, large vat-like containers were carefully slid from under the boiler, detached, and rolled by a small cart into a building with massive thick walls. The containers had pipe-like protuberances extending from the top. Men working behind shields performed the removal, casually cautious, and did not relax their automatic vigilance until the containers were safely in the building and the door was closed. The contents were, quote, hot, either through heat or radiation. The actions of the technicians all seemed to indicate the latter. The streets and roads are different, again, principally in size. The, quote, lane on which vehicles travel is nearly twice as wide as ours. Do you think it's possible that Robert Monroe like visited a parallel dimension here, like this whole thing led him to some kind of crazy parallel real reality? I mean, he's talking about it that way. Their version of our automobile is much larger. Even the smallest has a single bench seat that will hold 5 to 6 people abreast. The standard unit has only one fixed seat, that of the driver. Others are much like living room chairs placed around a compartment that measures some 15 by 20 feet. We got to draw this out. Somebody has to draw this thing out. Wheels are used, but without inflated tires, and steering is done by a single horizontal bar, not a wheel. Motive power is contained somewhere in the rear. Their movement is not very fast, at something like 15 to 20 miles per hour, and traffic is not heavy. Self-powered vehicles exist in the form of a four-wheeled platform which is steered by the feet acting upon the front wheels. A mechanism pumped by the arm transfers the energy to the rear wheels, much like the children's rowing wagons of some years back. These are used for short distances. Habits and customs are not like ours. What little has been gleaned implies a historical background with different events, names, places, and dates. Yet while the stage of man's evolution, the conscious mind translates the inhabitants as men, seems to be identical, technical and social evolution are not completely the same. So he's saying the conscious mind translates these inhabitants as men. So he's saying that his mind is translating these beings as humans, as men and women, right? The major discovery came soon after I gathered the courage for extended expeditions into Locale 3. In spite of early indications, the people there were not aware of my presence until I met and merged. Check this out. Until I met and merged temporarily and involuntarily with one who can only be described as the I who lives there. So he's merging with another being in this realm, and not voluntarily. The only explanation I can think of is that I, fully conscious of living and being here, was attracted to and began momentarily to inhabit the body of a person there, much like myself. When this took place, and it began to be an automatic process when I went to Locale 3, I simply took over, quote, his body. There was no awareness of his mental presence when I temporarily displaced him. My knowledge of him and his activities and his past come from his family, and what was evidently his brain memory bank. Though I knew that I was not he, I could feel objectively the emotional patterns of his past. I have wondered what embarrassment I have caused him as a result of the periods of amnesia created by my intrusions. Some must have brought him much distress. Okay, it's 11:11. Listen, got to do the restroom thing. Maybe it's because I'm in my 40s now, but I seem to have to. I pee on a schedule now. That's TMI, right? But so no, we're gonna finish this, but just think how trippy this is. We already went through Locale 1, Locale 2. Now he's calling this. I mean, the title of the chapter is Reverse Image, right? So he's calling this place Locale 3, where he experimented with this hole for months at a time, where he had to flip his body, 180 degrees to see this hole. Now he's moved through the hole, he's moved to this place. Now he's into this whole other reality that's like our physical reality. Just all kind of things are really different. Not only that, he's merged with some other body in this reality. So, yeah, this is gonna get a little bit deeper. But gotta go to the lavatory. So this is so freaking trippy, man. This book gets trippier too. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. We're back. Let's get this thing. This chapter is a lot longer than I thought. All right. All right. Thanks, Delina, for becoming a YouTube member. That's really cool of you. Thank you for your support. Appreciate that. Okay. So we are going through this journey with Robert Monroe, who seems to be in another dimension, who admittedly involuntarily inhabited the body of this other person in what he calls locale 3. Oh, no, we can't do that. No. My computer's trying to update. All right, so he momentarily inhabited the body of another person there, much like himself. And he said, when this took place, it began to be an automatic process. When I went to locale 3, I just simply took over his body. There was no awareness of his mental presence when I temporarily displaced him. My knowledge of him and his activities in his past came from his family, just doing a real quick recap here, and what was evidently his brain memory bank, though I knew that I was not he. I could feel objectively the emotional patterns of his past. I have wondered what embarrassment I have caused him as a result of these periods and intrusions. Some probably brought him some distress. So, here is the life I, there at the first intrusion, was a rather lonely man. He was not particularly successful in his field. He was an architect, contractor, and not too gregarious. He came of what might be classified as a low-income group and succeeded in going to the equivalent of a minor college. He spent much of his early career in a large city and an ordinary job. He lived on the second floor of a rooming house and took a bus to work. It was a strange city to him, and he made few friends. The bus, incidentally, was very wide, seating 8 abreast, and seats rose behind the driver in successively higher tiers so that all could see the road ahead. That's really weird. My first intrusion caught him just as he was getting off the bus. The driver looked at him suspiciously when I tried to pay a fare. It seems that none is charged. So he's doing this whole ghost Patrick Swayze thing, you know, when Whoopi Goldberg, I guess, tried to, were they inhabiting people's bodies and stuff? The next intrusion came at an emotional crisis. I there met Leah, a wealthy young woman with 2 children, a boy and a girl, both under 4 years of age. Leah was a sad, wistful, and somewhat preoccupied person who seemed to have experienced some major tragedy in her life. This had some relationship to her former husband, but was not clear. I there met her quite accidentally and was deeply attracted to her. The 2 children found in him a great companion, and Leah appeared only mildly interested at this first meeting. Okay, so he's not saying, that wigged me out for a second. So he's not saying Bob, was attracted to her. He's saying that the guy there, was attracted to her, because that'd be a little weird, right? I guess. So the 2 children found in him a great companion, and Leah appeared only mildly interested at first meeting. Her greatest response lay in his attention to and warmth for the children. A short time later, an intrusion occurred just as Leah and I there had announced to friends, or her friends, that they were going to be, quote, married. Now, this has a slightly different connotation in this reality. So it wasn't really like the married that we see, but kind of the same thing. There was much consternation among the friends, chiefly due to the fact that it had been only 30 days, since some major event had occurred in Leah's life. Maybe it was the divorce or her husband's death or some physical debilitation. But I there was still greatly attracted, and Leah was still sad and introspective. A later intrusion came when Leah and I there were living in a house in a semi-pastoral surrounding. The house sat on a hill, had long rectangular windows and very wide eaves, much like those of a pagoda. The railroad curved around the hill some 300 yards in the distance, and the tracks coming in from the right in a straight line, and then across the front of the hill, then around to the back and to the left. There was a deep green grass from the steps of the house, down over the roll of the hill, and behind the house, I there had an office, a one-room building where he worked. On this occasion, Leah entered the office and came over to the desk just as I had replaced I there. The workman wanted to borrow some of your tools, she said. I looked at her blankly. I was not sure what to say, so I asked her, what workman? Well, the men working on the road, of course. She had not yet sensed anything wrong. And before I realized what effect it would have, I said, there were no men working on the road. And with this, she looked at me intently with a growing suspicion. I was thoroughly unsure of what to do next, so I left his body and returned through the hole. Man, at some point, like, if you know you're messing up some other guy's life in an alternate reality, I don't know, maybe Robert's just, to me, I just wouldn't do that, man. It's not judging or anything, it's just a little crazy. Another eventful intrusion came when I there had set up his laboratory. He could make some kind of new discoveries. He had, perhaps with the assistance of Leah's wealth, taken a huge storage building, divided it internally into small rooms, and was conducting some kind of experiments in the middle of one. I displaced him in his body, but was unable to calculate what was next in his routine. Just then, Leah came in with visitors, principally to show the kind of work he had achieved in the renovating building. I, in the I there's body, stood there unable to speak when Leah asked me to tell them of the work I'd been doing. He's screwing this guy's life up, man. Somewhat embarrassed, Leah led the couple out into another room. I hesitated when perhaps I there would have followed. I tried to feel any pattern of activity that he might have been doing, but the best I could get was that he had been trying to develop new forms of theatrical entertainment, designing theater stages, lighting, and sets, all in an attempt to make watching a play a strongly subjective experience. With only this partial success in his recall, I left his body when I had heard them returning so as to avoid further complicating his life. A vacation in the mountains was underway at another intrusion point. I there, Leah, and the two children were riding along a winding mountain road, each on the self-propelled vehicle described elsewhere. I took over, inadvertently, just as they were reaching the bottom of one hill and had started up another. And new to the device, I tried to make it go up the next hill and soon rolled off the road and into a small pile of dirt. The rest waited while I tried to get back on the road, and I muttered that there were better ways to get around than this. This triggered something in Leah, and she suddenly became quiet. But why, I didn't know. I'm sure I there did. I tried to tell her that I was not the one who she thought, then realized that this was only making it worse. I left, returning to the hole in the physical body. So basically, Robert's like, he's landed in this alternate reality, and he's screwing this guy's relationship up in his life, it sounds like to me. In later intrusions, I there and Leah no longer lived together. He had met with some success, but some action of his alienated her. Alone, he has thought of her constantly and deeply regretted the weakness that made him displease her. He met her casually once in a large city and pleaded with her to let him visit her. She told him she would let him do so and see how things worked out. She lived in the equivalent of an apartment on the third floor of a residential building, and he promised to come. I think there's a bug in here. It's driving me crazy. All it did was open the door once, man, and that's all it takes. All right. Art's Arkansas for you, though. Unfortunately, I there lost or forgot the address she gave him, and the last intrusion was a lonely and frustrated man. Well, you know, is there a possibility, Robert, here that maybe the dude started going crazy because every time you intruded in his body, he had like lapse time events or something, you know? He was sure that Leah would interpret his loss of the address as indifference on his part and another example of his instability. He was working, but was spending his idle time trying to find Leah and the children. What can be made of all this? In view of the less than idyllic circumstances, it scarcely qualifies as an escape from reality via the unconscious, nor is it the type of life one might select to enjoy vicariously. In other words, he don't know how the hell any of this happened, and he wouldn't do this on purpose. I don't think anybody would. Nor is it the type of life one might select to enjoy vicariously. One can only speculate, and such speculation of itself must consider concepts unacceptable to present-day science. However, the dual but different life activity may lend a clue to the where of locale 3. The most important assumption is that locale 3 and locale 1, the here and now, are not the same. This is based upon the differences in scientific development. Locale 3 is not more advanced, perhaps even less so. There is no time in our known history where science was at the locale 3 stage. So if locale 3 is neither the known past, so it's not the past, nor the part of the present, and not the probable future of locale 1, then what is it? It is not a part of locale 2, so where only thought is needed or used. Dude, it's a parallel dimension, man. It might be a memory, racial or otherwise, of a physical Earth civilization that predates known history. It might be another Earth-type world located in another part of the universe, which is somehow accessible through mental manipulation. It might be an antimatter duplicate of this physical Earth world, where we are the same but different, bonded together, unit for unit, by a force beyond our present comprehension. Dr. Leon M. Letterman, professor of physics at Columbia University, has stated, quote, basic physics is completely consistent with the cosmological conception of a literal antiworld of stars and planets composed of atoms of antimatter, which is to say negative nuclei surrounded by positive electrons. We can now entertain the intriguing idea that these anti-worlds are populated by anti-people whose anti-scientists are perhaps even now excited by the discovery of matter. So Robert Monroe goes in, he finds this hole, goes into this parallel dimension, I guess, and merges with this guy's body, and then like he's awful judgy about the guy too, can you tell? You know, and then kind of messes with his relationship, and now he's back thinking, where did I go? I didn't go to the future, the past, the present. I went to some alternate reality of some kind. Yeah. Damn. Let's see. All right, we'll finish. Yeah, we'll get into this. All right, so Chapter 7, Postmortem. Let me look at the chat, though, and see what any of you guys are thinking about this. It is some kind of weird paradox, I think. Yeah, it definitely is. Like, it took him a while. Here's the weird thing. It took him a while to get through this hole. Like, this could be a real thing, because he experimented with this hole for months and months on a time. I'm sure his mind is, at least during the transition of the hole into this different reality, was like messing with himself a little bit. You know, when with the hands grabbing him, and that, to me, that stuff could come from like a psychological unconscious thing. But all right, Chapter 7, Postmortem. Any acknowledgement of the existence of the second body immediately demands the question mankind has pondered since the day he learned to think. Do we live on? Is there life beyond the grave? Our religions say, believe, have faith. But this is not quite enough for the syllogistic thinker who seeks valid premises that are clear-cut, leading to an inescapable conclusion. All I can do is be as reportorial and objective as one can be in a basically subjective experience. Perhaps my premises will be valid to you as you read them. What's up, Domac? What's up, brother? I first met Dr. Richard Gordon in 1942 in New York. He was an MD, a specialist in internal medicine. We became friends, and he became our family doctor. He had a very successful practice built up over the years and possessed a rare, cynical, sarcastic sense of humor. He was a down-to-earth realist with the wisdom of experience. He was in his 50s when we first met, so I never knew him as a young man. He was short and thin, with straight white hair tending to baldness. Dr. Gordon had two conspicuous mannerisms. He had decided to live a long time, evidently, and so paced himself very carefully. He walked deliberately in a slow, careful stride. He hurried only when absolutely necessary. And more correctly, he strolled when he walked, with studied casualness. Second, when someone visited him in his office, he would glance out from the inner doorway and stare intently. He didn't say hello or nod or wave. He simply stared as if he were saying, "Now what in the hell's the matter with him?" Without ever having spoken of it, Dr. Gordon and I had a very warm and close rapport. It was one of those things that happened without explanation, with no logical reason. We had not too much in common other than the fact of going through the life experience at nearly the same moment in history. In the spring of 1961, I visited Dr. Gordon at his office and had lunch with him there, cooked over a Bunsen burner by his longtime nurse. He looked tired and preoccupied, and I commented about it. "I haven't been feeling too well," he replied, and then flared up into his usual self. "What's the matter? Can a doctor get sick once in a while?" I laughed and suggested he do something about it, such as seeing his family physician. "I will," he said absently, then back up to his normal self. "But first, I'm going to Europe." I said that sounded fine. "Already have the tickets," he went on. We've gone a number of times before, but this time I want to see a lot of the places we missed. You ever been to Greece or Turkey, Spain, Portugal, Egypt? I said no. Well, you ought to, he said, pushing his food away. Go when you have the chance. You wouldn't want to miss seeing places like that. I'm not going to miss my chance. I said I would do my best, but I didn't have a fat practice that would wait around for me to return. But he was serious again. Bob? I waited for him to continue. I don't like the way I feel, he said carefully. Why don't you and your wife come to Europe with us? I wish we had. Dr. Gordon and his wife sailed to Spain a week or so later, and there was no word, so I assumed they were sunning themselves somewhere in the Mediterranean. 6 weeks later, Dr. Gordon or Mrs. Gordon phoned. The doctor had taken sick in Europe, and they had to cut their trip short. He had refused treatment overseas and had insisted that they return home instead. He had been in great pain and had gone immediately into the hospital for an exploratory operation. I wasn't able to see him in the hospital, but I was kept informed of his condition by his wife. The exploratory operation was a success. They found what they were looking for, an abdominal cancer beyond treatment. Nothing more could be done but to make him as comfortable as possible. He would never leave the hospital alive, that is, or more aptly physically alive. With this news, I felt I must find some way to see Dr. Gordon. It was all quite clear now, as most things are in retrospect. I'm sure he knew of this condition that day in his office, and after all, he was an internist. He certainly could have read the signs and symptoms in his own very personal laboratory. That was the reason for the sudden trip to Europe. He definitely wasn't going to miss his last chance, and he didn't. The need to talk with Dr. Gordon seemed urgent. In all of our conversations, I'd never mentioned my wild talent or what I had been going through. I think I was afraid he would have thrown back his head and laughed, then sent me to a psychiatrist's son. Now it was different. He was facing something where perhaps I could help him for a change. I didn't know how what I have gone through could help, but I had a deep conviction that it would. I tried again to see Dr. Gordon, but only his wife was permitted in his room, and I finally asked Miss Gordon to help me get in to see him. She explained that the doctor was in such pain that he was kept under deep sedation most of the time. Thus he was very rarely lucid and conscious. Usually he recognized her early in the morning, but even this didn't happen every day. I told her that I had something important to tell him. I didn't elaborate. Even in her sorrow, she seemed to recognize that I intended to bring a message beyond that of a comforting friend. The intuitive woman found a solution. Why don't you write him a letter, she suggested, and I'll take it to him. I said I was afraid he wouldn't be able to read it. Well, if you write it, she said, I'll read it to him when he's conscious enough to understand it. And so that's what we did. She read it again and again to Dr. Gordon whenever he was conscious. And she told me later that these repeated readings were at his request, not at her suggestion. Was there something in the letter he wanted to place firmly in his mind? When I heard this, I felt a great sense of regret. Perhaps he would not have leaned back and laughed after all. We might have shared much more if I had only gathered the courage to discuss my activities in quotations with him. Here are pertinent excerpts to the letter to Dr. Gordon. Yeah, so he's starting to regret, like, man, why didn't I just tell Dr. Gordon that I was getting out of body? And we could have talked about this stuff, you know. Here's the letter, or parts of the letter. And you remember all the tests and examinations you gave me because you knew I was worried about something? Well, that was when it started. Now, as long as you are in the hospital for a while, you might just try it and find out for yourself. That way you don't have to take my word for it. It will give you something to do while you recuperate. First, you have to accept the possibility, remote as it may be to your experience, that you can act, think, and exist without the restriction of a physical body. And don't tell your wife to send me to that psychiatrist son of yours. It takes more than Freud to solve this one. Besides, he's making enough money as it is. In all of our conversations, it didn't seem appropriate to bring up this subject, but as long as you're going to be tied down, give it some serious consideration. It might be useful later on, and I hope you can discover a few things about it that I have passed over. It all depends upon whether you can also develop the ability to leave your physical body while loafing in that hospital bed. If so, you might find many ways that it can be helpful. It may be one way to ease physical pain. I don't know, give it a try. With all the sincerity I can muster, I urge you, Dick, to think about it. You will have passed a major milestone when you do no more than accept the idea that this second, non-physical body of yours actually might exist. Once this has been achieved, your only other barrier is fear, and it need not be, because this is like being afraid of your own shadow, of yourself. It is natural rather than strange. Get used to this idea that your lack of conscious experience with it does not necessarily mean it is something to be afraid of. Unknowns are feared only as long as they remain so. If you can hang on to this, you need not have fear. Then, and only then, try the formula I've written here. I don't know the effect of any medications you may be taking, but it may help or hinder the technique. But give it a try. It may or may not work the first time. Most important, let me know how you get along with it. When you get better, perhaps I can drop over and discuss the whole thing in detail. I would have come down in person, but you know how cranky the hospital rules are. If you tell your wife about any attempts, I'm sure she will relay them to me, but I would much rather hear them from you later on. Just let me know. And that's the end of the quotation. So Mr. Gordon did not let me know if he actually did try. I felt it entirely inappropriate to query her too specifically at the time. She was much too sadly overwrought with the knowledge that Dr. Gordon's condition was terminal. I still am not sure that she realized my letter could be construed as a suggested training for death. Dr. Gordon dropped into a coma several weeks later, and he died peacefully without regaining consciousness. For several months, I thought about an attempt to go to Dr. Gordon wherever he was. He was the first person close to me who had died since the development of my wild talent. I was both curious and objective. It was the first such opportunity. I was sure that Dr. Gordon wouldn't mind if he did continue to exist. Not knowing about such things, I decided he would probably need some rest before I interfered with whatever he was doing, and also I needed to summon upon some additional courage of my own. This was an experiment I hadn't tried before, and it might be truly dangerous. Then on a Saturday afternoon, I made the attempt. It took about an hour to get into the vibration state, and I finally swung up out of the body, mentally yelling, "I want to see Dr. Gordon." And after a moment, I started to move rapidly upward, and soon all I could see was a blur of motion and feel what seemed like a rush of very thin air. Also, I felt a hand under my left elbow. Somebody was helping me get there. After what seemed an endless journey, I suddenly stopped or was halted, and I was standing somewhat dazed in a large room. My impression that it was an institution of some kind, and the hand under my elbow moved me to an open doorway and stopped me just inside the door, where I could look into the adjoining room. A male voice spoke almost directly into my left ear. "If you stand right here, the doctor will see you in a minute." I nodded in agreement and stood there waiting. A group of men were in the room. 3 or 4 were listening to a young man about 22 who was excitedly relating something to them, complete with gestures. I didn't see Dr. Gordon and kept expecting him to appear at any moment. And the more I waited, the warmer I seemed to feel. Finally, I became so hot that I was extremely uncomfortable. I didn't know what was causing me to feel so hot, and I wasn't sure I could stand it much longer. It actually felt as if streams of perspiration were running down my face. I knew that I couldn't stay much longer, and I couldn't take the heat. If Dr. Gordon didn't appear soon, I would have to go back without seeing him. I turned and looked again at the group of men, thinking that perhaps I should ask them about Dr. Gordon. At just that moment, the short, thin young man with big shock of hair stood in the middle of this conversation, or stopped in the middle of the conversation, and looked at me intently for a moment. After the simple short glance, he turned back to the other men and continued his animated discussion. The heat became unbearable, and I decided I had to leave. I couldn't wait for Dr. Gordon. Using a motion I had learned, I moved back quickly upwardly and away from the room. It was a long journey back, and after reintegrating, I checked my physical body. I felt cold, a little stiff. Certainly there were no streams of perspiration running down my cheeks. Disappointed, I sat up and made notes of the trip. I had failed for some reason. I had not been able to find Dr. Gordon. Time away from the physical was 2 hours. I wonder what the hell that heat was. There is a stubborn streak in my heredity. The following Saturday, I tried again, and just at the moment I left the physical body and started to yell for Dr. Gordon, a voice spoke right beside me, almost irritated. "Why do you want to see him again? You saw him last Saturday." I was so surprised that I dropped back into the physical almost instantly. I sat up and looked around the office. There was no one in the room. Everything was normal. I thought of trying again, but decided it was too late for another attempt that day. Last Saturday, there was nothing important about last Saturday. It didn't work. I went back through my notes for last Saturday, and there it was. "The doctor will see you in a minute," is what the voice said. And what could have been a minute later, a short, thin young man with a shock of hair turned and looked at me intently. He had looked at me without saying a word, as if he were thinking what I had noted was a perfect description of what Dr. Gordon would have been at 32 instead of 70. That's pretty crazy that he saw the guy's younger self. What's even crazier is like the heat, that crazy heat that he felt. I wonder what that was. This seemed to lend more credence to the experience than anything else. I'd expected to see a man of 70. I didn't recognize him because he was not what I expected. If I had suggested this as a hallucination, I conceivably would not have met a 70-year-old, or would have met a 70-year-old Dr. Gordon. That's a good point, because he didn't know, possibly doesn't know what the guy looks like at, I guess, 30 or something. So that's a really good point. He's expecting to see the guy that he knows, the guy that he's used to. Later, at a visit to the home of Dr. Gordon's widow, I managed to see an old photo of Dr. Gordon when he was 22. Of course, I didn't tell Miss Gordon why I wanted to see the picture, and it matched perfectly the man I saw, and who saw me, quote, there. She also mentioned that at that age, he was very active and eager, always in a hurry, and had a big shock of blonde hair. Someday, I will try to visit Dr. Gordon. Another time, in anticipation of a move out of state, we sold our home when a buyer suddenly came along. As a temporary measure, we rented a house for the year prior to our move. It was an interesting place built on a pinnacle of rock directly over a small river. We rented it through an agent and never met or came in contact with any of the owners. My wife and I took the master bedroom, which was on the main floor. About a week after we moved in, we went to bed and my wife fell asleep almost immediately. I lay there in semi-darkness and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the night sky. Without willing it, I felt that familiar vibration start again and wondered if it would be all right to let it happen in a new location. So this is the first time he's getting out of body in a different house. Our bed was positioned off the north wall. To the right of the bed, if you were laying down, was the door to the hallway. To the left of the bed was the doorway into the master bathroom. I was just in the act of lifting out of the physical when I noticed something at the doorway. It was a white form, the general size and shape of a person. And having become extremely cautious about, quote, strangers, I waited to see what would happen. The white form moved into the room around the bed and passed within a foot of my side of the bed as it went into the bathroom. I could see that it was a woman of medium height, with dark, straight hair and rather deep-set eyes, not young, but not old. She was in the bathroom only a few minutes, then emerged and started around the bed again. I sat up, non-physically, I'm sure, and reached out to touch her to see if I really could. Seeing the motion, she stopped and looked at me. When she spoke, I could hear her quite clearly. I could see the windows and drapes behind her and through her. "What are you going to do about the painting?" It was a woman's voice, and I could see her lips move. Not knowing what to say, I tried to give a satisfactory answer. I said I would take care of it, don't worry. With this, she smiled slightly. Then she reached out with both of her hands and took my hands in hers. Clasping my hands between both of hers, the hands felt real, normally warm and alive. And she gave my hand a little squeeze, gently dropped it, and moved around the bed and out the door. I waited, but she didn't return. I lay down, activated the physical body, then slid out of bed. I went to the hall door and looked into the other rooms. There was no one there. I went through all of the downstairs rooms and found nothing. Then I made out my notes, went back to bed, and slept. A few days later, I met with the psychiatrist who lived in the house next to us, Dr. Samuel Kahn. I kept meeting psychiatrists like this casually. I asked him if he had known the people who owned the house. Yes, I knew them quite well, Dr. Kahn said. Mrs. W. died about a year ago, and after that, Mr. W. refused to go into the house, just moved out and didn't come back. I said it was too bad that it was a fine house. Well, it was her house, you understand, Dr. Kahn replied. Matter of fact, she died right there in the house, in the room you're sleeping in. I said that was interesting. She must have liked the house very much. Oh, she did, he replied. Very fond of paintings. Had them hung all over the place, but the house was pretty much her whole life. I asked him if he had happened to have any photos of Mrs. W. Let me see, he thought for a moment. Why, yes, I think she was in a group picture taken at the club. I'll see if I can find it. Dr. Kahn came back a few minutes later, and in his hand was a photograph showing some 50 or 60 men and women, most of them simply heads as they stood in rows. Dr. Kahn studied the picture. She's in here somewhere. Yes, I'm sure. I looked over his shoulder at the picture. In the second row was a familiar face. I touched it with my finger and asked Dr. Kahn if this was Miss W. Oh, yes, that's Miss W. He looked at me curiously within realization. Oh, you must have found a picture of her in the house somewhere. I said yes, that was it, very casually, and I asked him if Mrs. W. had any unusual mannerisms or the like. Well, no, not that I can remember, he answered, but I'll think about it. There must have been something. I thanked him and started to leave. I turned when he called. Wait a minute, there was one item, Dr. Kahn said, and asked what it was. Why, whenever she was happy or grateful, she took your hand in both of hers, palm to palm, and gave a little squeeze. Does that help? That helped. With the experience, I became a little more convinced that I could take such chances in areas that were certainly unusual. A very close friend, Agnew Bonson, was about my age, and we had much in common. I had known him for about 8 years, and he was a pilot, among other things, and flew frequently in his company airplane. One of his research interests was anti-gravity, which we discussed many times. He had a laboratory where he conducted experiments in this field, and among matters we discussed relative to his gravity studies was the question of how one or even two people could demonstrate any effective results in anti-gravity in this age of massive research teams and extremely expensive instrumentation. On a business trip to New York in 1964, I found myself in my hotel room with an hour to spare in the afternoon. I decided to take a nap, and I laid down on the bed and had just started to drop off to sleep when I heard Mr. Bonson's voice. There is a way to prove anti-gravity. All you have to do is to demonstrate it yourself, and you have been trained to do it. I sat up, fully awake, and I knew that the voice was referring to, or what it was referring to, but I hadn't had the courage to try it. But why did Mr. Bonson's voice sound so real in this dream? I looked at the clock by the bed, and it was just about 3:15. I was too wide awake now to sleep, so I got up and went out. When I returned home 2 days later, my wife was very quiet, and I asked her what was wrong. We didn't want to upset you with all you had to do in New York, she said, but Agnew Bonson is dead. He was killed trying to land his airplane in a small field in Ohio. I remembered Mr. Bonson's voice in New York. I had asked her if he had been killed 2 days ago at about 3:15 in the afternoon. My wife looked at me a long time before she said, yes, that was when it happened. She didn't ask how I knew, but she was past that long ago. I didn't make any attempt to go to Mr. Bonson for several months. I presumed without any known reason that he needed rest. It had something to do with a violent death, and I'm not sure I was right. Finally, I grew impatient on Sunday afternoon. I laid down with a deliberate intent of going to visit Mr. Bonson. After about an hour of preparation, I finally made it out of the physical and began to travel rapidly through what seemed to be nothing but darkness. I was mentally shouting, Agnew Bonson, again and again as I traveled. Suddenly I stopped, or was stopped, but I was in a rather dark room, and someone was holding me very still in a standing position. After a moment of waiting, a cloud of white gas seemed to blow up through a small hole in the floor. The cloud took the form of some sense told me it was Mr. Bonson, although I could not see him too well or identify his features. He spoke immediately in an excited and happy way. "Bob, you'll never believe all the things that have happened since I've been here." There was no more. At a signal from someone, the cloud of white gas lost its human form and seemed to recede back into the hole in the floor. The hands on my elbows steered me away, and I took off back to the physical. That is the way Mr. Bonson would have been, too interested in new things and new experiences to waste time in the then or the past, just like Dr. Gordon. If it was a self-induced hallucination, at least it was original. I have never read anything like it or had anything like it. Does that explain the time coincidence in the New York hotel room? There is one more. In 1964, my father died at the age of 82. Although I had been rebellious in early years against paternal authority, I felt quite close to my father in later years, and I'm sure he felt close to me. He had suffered a stroke several months before, which had left him almost completely paralyzed and incapable of speech. The latter was evidently most vexing, as it would naturally be to a man who was a linguist, whose life had been devoted to the study and teaching of languages. During this period when I visited him, he made desperate, heart-rending attempts to speak to me, to tell me something. His eyes pleaded that I understand. Only slight moans came from his lips, and I tried to comfort him and talk to him. He tried his best to answer, and I couldn't tell if he even understood my words. My father died quietly in his sleep one afternoon. He had lived a full life, a successful one, and his death brought mingled sadness and a sense of release. Again and again I have realized the importance of some of the down-to-earth beliefs and concepts that I learned from my father. I will always be grateful. But this time, with one very close to me just recently dead, I had much less trepidation than before, or perhaps familiarity, at least the sense of it bred a little less caution and more faith. The only reason that I waited several months was one of convenience. Other pressing matters in my personal and business life seemed to prevent the necessary ability to relax. However, I woke up about 3 a.m. on a weeknight and felt that I could try to visit my father. I went through my ritual, and the vibrations came easily and swiftly. And in moments I disengaged without effort and was up free in the darkness. And this time I didn't use the mental yell. I concentrated upon the personality of my father and reached to be where he was. I began to move rapidly through the darkness, and I could see nothing, but there was the tremendous sense of motion coupled with the pull of thick, liquid-like air rushing past my body. It is much like the feeling of plunging through the water after a dive. Suddenly I stopped. I do not recall anyone stopping me this time, nor could I feel the hand on my elbow like I did before. I was in a dim room of large proportions. I seemed to know that this was like a hospital or convalescent home, but no treatment, as we know it, was practiced here. I started to look around for my father, but I didn't know what to expect. But at least I looked forward to a joyful reunion. There were several small rooms off the main room where I stood, and I looked into 2 of these, and in each there were several people who paid little to no attention to me, and I began to wonder if I'd come to the wrong place. A third room was no larger than a monk's cell, with a small window about shoulder height and the wall opposite the door. There was a man leaning against the wall near the window, looking out. I saw only his back as I entered. Then he turned and saw me, and his face registered utter astonishment. And my dead father spoke to me. "What are you doing here?" He said this in exactly the manner a person would use who had traveled halfway around the world and then met someone to whom he had just said goodbye back home. I was too excited to speak, and just stood there, hoping for the joyful reunion I'd expected, and it came immediately. My father reached forward, grabbed me under the armpits, and happily swung me high over his head and down again, just as I remembered so well as a small child, and just as most fathers have done with their small sons. He put me down on my feet again, and I was confident enough to speak, and I asked him how he was feeling. "Much better now," he said. "The pain is gone." It was almost as if I had reminded him of something he wanted to forget. The energy just seemed to drain out of him, and he turned away, appearing tired. As I watched him, he seemed to forget I was there, and he looked thinner and about 50. based upon pictures we have when he was that age. I sensed that the meeting was over. There could be no more for now, and quietly I moved back out of the room, turned and, quote, reached out, and returned to the physical body. It took much less time to return than to go. Was it that way? Was the pain so intense in those days that he couldn't make himself understood to get help to ease the pain? If that is true, what a terrible prison his body must have been. Death was indeed a blessing. Will I try to see him again? I don't know. I don't know if I should. There are many other experiences less personal but equally impressive, and they all led me to an inescapable empirical conclusion, which alone justified the many hours of anguish, uncertainty, fear, loneliness, and delusion, which was a point of embarkation on what some call the quantum jump in thinking, the beginning of a new viewpoint and perspective, which permitted the pains and pleasures of a here now to drop into their proper category of importance. What is a minute, hour, or year in an infinity of existence? Which opened a doorway to a reality that may ultimately prove incomprehensible to the conscious human mind, yet will continue to tantalize the curious and incriminate the intellectual. And this, my answer, compound these experiences with the knowledge that the human personality can and does operate away from the physical body, and there can be but one. If there is to be a great message herein, this may suffice. And then the next chapter is called Chapter 8, The Bible Tells Me So, but we'll pick up later this week. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, I'm not sure. But damn. So he goes from vibrating into a hole to going to this other dimension, like taking over someone's body, and now, he visited 2 of his dead friends and his dead father. And all of this stuff, right? Like if he's telling the truth, which, I mean, it seems to me like he's telling the truth. It's pretty damn, revealing that what's happening is real, consciously, I would say. So, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on reading this, but all right, well, if you haven't read this book, grab it. And thanks for your support. The people that support through Patreon, YouTube, and just donations, whatever. Thank you guys for your support. Those that just come out and listen live, thank you so much. It's awesome hanging out late night talking about this crazy stuff, isn't it? Like I said, Chapter 8 is The Bible Tells Me So, which I think he's going to get more into like the second body. This does get weirder too. It's crazy, like Robert Monroe's whole journey. Like just book 1 is so freaking wild and strange, and then the second and third books just get crazier and crazier. But hope you guys have sweet dreams tonight. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll see you in the next broadcast. Night night.
Tombstones climbing up the sky to claim the boredom and the wine. You know there's an operator, some strange passenger inside. To that strange power I'm resigned like an iron anchor. I'm just a ghost in your stereo. The face just a lost song I wrote, and I'm just a ghost in your stereo.